Hey everyone, Gamer here. Today I want to talk about Blood, Sweat and Pixels, the triumphant turbulent stories behind how video games are made by Jason Schreier. During the time the book is written, which is 2017, and even now, game development are full of horror stories from each worker and the process of how game was developed. The author's attempt at looking at the industry further with a lot of interviews from 10 different games. There are no guarantees in a lot of jobs, but in media like game, where there is no one thing that can help ensure its success, it can give you massive insecurity. I think that's one of the many reasons the industry become one of the most competitive fields. But somehow, there are a lot of problems that are still there or maybe even getting worse with the game industry, even though the history of the industry is already long enough to learn from it. So in order to make sense of this, the author looked through 10 games and interviewed their developers for more insight into each game's. We first go to Pillars of Eternity, where he learned about publisher and studio relation, where publisher funded the studio, and then the studio makes the game. But publisher tends to want something made even though they have no idea how a game was made, and what makes them fun, or if it's even possible. To make it worse, publisher can just stop funding a project, then the studio will have to lay off their employee or even entirely shut down. Which is what happened when Microsoft decided to shut down a project by Obsidian, which makes them have to lay off hundreds of their employees. Which now in 2023, I don't think a lot of this has gotten any better, especially in most large corporations. If anything, they got a lot more problematic. If not for the workers, then for the game. The life of an independent developer is every morning you wake up wondering if your publisher are going to call and cancel your games, or what say. I wish I was more of a sociopath or psychopath and I could just completely ignore the fact that there's this guillotine pointed at my neck at all time. But I can, and I don't think a lot of developers can. And unfortunately, there's that constant threat, and that threat is used a lot. It's used all the time. As a result of this, they have to rely then on Kickstarter, which is new at the time. Something that gaming industry will rely more and more, especially the indie scene. Then we move to Uncharted 4. Where we learn on what happens when there's a change in director and how that will affect the game and the worker. Then we have successful indie stories like Stardew Valley and Shovel Knight. But other than that, there's not much else to these game development stories. Unfortunately, the book had a lot of flaws in it. Small nitpick first. Although not a lot, there are attempts at joke that is more of a roll your eyes kind of joke instead of laugh out loud jokes. But the more severe flaw is that the book has no direction. A lot of the entry feels very random. There's nothing connecting one title to another besides their games. There are also a lot of weird story that is not further explored by the author. For example, the chapter on Diablo 3, a game that started showing how greedy Blizzard Corporation can be, only talk about how the initial launch fails, the auction site, and how the expansion tried to salvage the game reputation. It is one of the entry in the book that feels very PR, for lack of a better word. Especially now that we have the hindsight of Diablo Immortal and Overwatch 2. The author also didn't call out or ask anything critical to the developer, which, to be fair, this is written long before Diablo Immortal, but it does kill the vibe of the book quite early. There's also another weird story that the author just passed uncritically on Halo Wars, where they are blatantly using coding and gameplay that doesn't exist for onstage demo. Although they had impressed fans with their define-narrated demo at E3 2007, the Halo Wars team was in a sad state. They scripted the demo entirely by hand, with code that wouldn't work in the final game. Sure, the graphic was running in real time, but the artificial intelligence wasn't properly hooked up, and playing an actual match of Halo Wars wasn't nearly as satisfying as the demo made it look. Which, by the way, is mentioned again in another chapter on Dragon Age Inquisition. And none of this raised any question from the author, which is such a waste. There are so much interesting topics that could be discussed in the book, but the author only scratched the development of 10 games without any direction whatsoever. It goes from an indie game to AAA game, back and forth, and as I mentioned before, there's no apparent reason on why it flows the way it flows. This goes on until the book then ends with the cancellation of Star Wars 1313 and then end in a whimper. I kinda wish the book went deeper into some of these very interesting topics. The crunch culture, maybe even the toxic work environment some of these companies can have, or the deceptive marketing that was mentioned in the book as if they're normal. A lot of games, especially AAA games, has been very notorious nowadays with its very messy and finished launch, deceptive trailers, microtransactions, and so on, which in hindsight now, Diablo 3 and few games mentioned in the book is also a perpetrator of this issue. They let the game launch with a lot of bugs being found by the players, game-breaking bugs, added paywall in the paid game so not everyone can fully enjoy what the game can offer unless you pay more, and that's not even talking about the bloating problem of AAA games itself. On the Witcher 3 chapter, the developer mentioned that they deleted most of their quests because a lot of them are just fetch quests, and focus more on quests like the Bloody Baron because it is more memorable. It's quality over quantity. Meanwhile, a lot of games are also very bloated with unnecessary contents like Circle Guy mentioned in one of his recent videos, which is such a shame because games are already such an underrated storytelling medium as it is compared to movies or music. We have interesting use of gameplay as storytelling medium. A lot of games have done this. Storytelling that are unique only in games, and it is still so underrated. But instead of going into all these topics that can be delved into, we have this mess of a book that is somehow mentioned as sources in a lot of other similar type of books. This Nothing Burger. Honestly, if you just want to see more about game development, that guy Glenn is a much better choice compared to this book. That's about it.